Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, here again with Chaz. How you doing, Chaz?
How's it going? Hello, everyone.
Well, it was going good until I realized that today is the red day of our Shadows over Innistrad
Ah,
review, so I have to spend time talking about my least favorite color in all Magic. but
it's
any,
okay. I'll help you get through it.
all
So,
right,
everyone, pick up your magnifying glasses and let's discover some things to talk about.
all right. This first one I have to say intrigues me. I don't think it's good, but intrigues me. Goldnight Castigator, maybe a unique power and toughness combination. I don't think I've ever seen a 4/9 before. Definitely not on a red flyer. So, what's your opinion on Goldnight Castigator, Chaz?
You're absolutely right. You do not see 4/9 on like any red creature, probably ever. So when I saw that, I was like, "What?" And then you read the text, and you're like, "Oh, I understand why." Um, I really don't know how to rank this card as an aggressive player. I think it could be okay as 4 mana, but something tells me I do not want my like opponent to get 6 damage fiery tempers firing off on their turn. It's just going to be really awkward if you can't finish the game really quickly because your opponent gets the it's basically a furnace of wrath, so your opponent gets the benefit too, and it just could be awkward if your opponent can do more damage than you can on the crackback. So I'm really undecided about this card. I don't even know if it could be like a solid sideboard card, but maybe if there's some super duper like dirtily control deck, I think that's where Golden Knight Castigator can shine.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, the problem is you get a what seems to be a pretty powerful card, a 4 mana, essentially a 4/4.5 flyer since it doubles the damage to itself. So something with 5 power would kill it, but something with 4 power would not. So you get what looks to be a fairly powerful hasty flyer, but you give your opponent a 4 or 5 mana card in the Furnace of Wrath effect that you were talking about. So this card, you either need to know you're playing in a matchup where you're not going to be taking direct damage and your opponent doesn't have a board full of creatures to crack back with, so like a control matchup, or you need to be able to end the game with it right away. Like if you're doing the last 4 points of damage, then it's obviously fine. So I think it's very restrictive. It's also very interesting. I just, for some reason, I am intrigued by this card. The power and toughness, the abilities, like the whole thing is just so strange and unique. I don't know if I can say I like it, but I'm definitely intrigued by where this card came from, who designed it, and if it has any place in competitive Magic.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly intriguing. Really interesting design, like you said. It's just I don't know if it can solidify itself into an aggressive archetype. It might come in through the sideboard, like I said. That could be an option, but with the landscape that's getting paved here, there's going to be some aggressive decks, and I just feel really nervous about attacking, and then my opponent could be killing me from really far off. I mean, everything's essentially dealing double damage, so I don't. You could really die really quickly.
Yes, it is going to be very easy to die on the crackback once you have a Golden Knight Castigator on the battlefield. So I guess this is for me a big wait and see. Like maybe someone will figure it out, but it's worse than it looks at first glance. If it had a blank text box and it was just a 4/9 flyer in red, that would be insane. But once you read the text, it gets progressively worse every line you read.
Right. Yeah. Just turning like Falkenrath Gorger or any low-costed aggressive card and doubling their power is just I don't know. And that's why I'm really undecided about this card.
Well, the next red mythic I have made up my mind on. There's no doubt on this one. Wolf of Devil's Breach. I said this might be, it is, in my opinion, easily the worst mythic in the set. Maybe the worst mythic in standard, and might deserve at least some arguments for being on like the top 10 list of worst mythics of all time. So that is my opinion on Wolf of Devil's Breach. What do you think, Chaz?
Yeah, this card is a dog. I mean, literally, it's a wolf, but it's 5 mana for a 5/5 is not bad. So there is that, but it just doesn't really provide anything. I mean, the ability, you probably won't even be able to play it or pay for it sometimes, and it just only hits creatures, and I guess planeswalkers is okay, but yeah, there's just not many instances, if any, that this is going to be a good card and constructed.
Yeah, it's just, I said before, when I first read it, I just naturally assumed that it had haste, like all red 5-drop mythics. And even with haste, like, I think with haste it would be alright. But even with haste, it's not Thundermaw Hellkite or something like that. It's not like a broken card. So I'm really, it's just odd to me that it is so seemingly underpowered. Like, I think you said this on the podcast. It feels like you're missing something when you read this card. Like, it can't possibly be as bad as it looks when you read it over.
Yeah, exactly. You're just missing something. I mean, when you put this up in the pantheon of like red mythics, where you have even like Thunder. What was the dragon in Theros?
Oh, Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah, Stormbreath Dragon, which was a kind of a nerfed version of Thundermaw Hellkite, and then like Bonfire of the Damned. I mean, when you put this up in the pantheon of red mythics, this is really, really underwhelming, and it's just underwhelming as a card in general.
Yes, I agree 100%. I think, actually, we are both agreeing on this one. Worst mythic in the whole set, and unlikely to be playable anywhere outside of Limited. So, the theme, one of the themes, outside of flip cards and zombies and the other tribal stuff, one of the themes of Shadows over Innistrad is burn spells, or removal spells, rather, at rare. So, red actually has several removal spells at rare. First one, Avacyn's Judgment. Sort of a forked bolt, I guess, on its front half, but then it turns into a fireball, if you can madness it. What do you think about this one, Chaz?
Oh, very, very solid. Obviously, the forked bolt part isn't forked bolt, but you make up for that for the incredible madness cost. Again, just madness making this so much more viable and so much more appealing. It's really good.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think this card is very strong. The fact that you can always use it as a shock or a fork bolt, even though it's a bad one, makes it okay. Like, you can kill a 2-drop on turn 2, and the fact that in the late game it can just be absurd and close out the game makes it a really flexible card, which is uncommon in burn spells. Usually burn spells are good in the late game but horrible in the early game, or good in the early game but horrible in the late game. This one kind of does both. This next one's a little more questionable, for standard especially. Burn from Within. So just one of those X burn spells we see all the time, but it can exile an indestructible creature. So if a creature has indestructible, it loses indestructible. What about this one, Chaz? Do you see any reason to play this?
Not nearly as good as Avacyn's Judgment. I know it's kind of like similar with the X cost. If indestructible is a really, like, if it's a thing, if it's somehow taking over standard and a lot of things have indestructible, obviously you would want to play some sort of number of burn from within in the 75. But overall, it's just not that good. I mean, Fireball is just not as inspiring anymore. We don't have channel, so that's out. But keep in mind, you only have to deal 1 point of damage with burn from within rather, to remove an indestructible creature and exile it.
Oh, that is a very good point. So I don't know. These spells typically aren't standard playable. We get the 1 red plus X burn spell all the time. I just don't think red X plus deal that amount of damage is playable in standard anymore.
If there's an instance where a lot of indestructible creatures are out there, then you could obviously, give burn from within the nod to in your 75. But overall, I don't think it's that great, and I wouldn't play it over a card like Avacyn's Judgment.
This next one, I don't know what to make of this. Devil's Playground, you get 4 devil tokens, which are essentially Goblin Arsonists, I think is the card. They deal a damage when they die. I don't know. It definitely seems bad compared to Hordling Outburst.
Yeah, 6 for 4 isn't that great, but they do have Mock Fanatic's ability, so I guess that's okay. I don't know, maybe some big red archetype that might want to curve into this. and close out a game or something like that. But I'm undecided about this card. I'm not really too excited about it.
Yeah, I'm not really expecting it to see much play in standard. It just seems too expensive for me. Even though if you think about it, you do get 4 creatures, and eventually you're going to get 4 points of burn for 6 mana, which makes it a little better when you consider it in that light. But I think it's just too much to see play in Constructed. I mean, when you're spending 6 red mana in Constructed, you can have a Chandra, and you're not gonna choose Devil's Playground over Chandra very often.
No, I agree with you.
Well, there are some red cards though that are maybe the best at what they do ever. I think someone told me, and as an aggro player, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first Savannah Lions type card in red that did not have a downside.
Yes, we're talking about Falkenrath Gorger. It's amazing. We have now made Savannah Lions an obsolete card. This is just all upside. Even if you take your hand and cover the text and not read it, still pretty good. I mean, you get a 2-mana 2/1 for 1, so that's obviously good value. And then just the ability makes things really interesting, especially in the vampire archetype. That's a really awesome ability to have. It turns cards like Drana or Olivia or any vampire into an instant speed card. So it's going to be really interesting to have this in the 1 slot, 1-drop. Really, really good card.
Yeah, I think this card is absurdly powerful for red. Like, white gets these effects with the no downside 2/1s for 1. Red doesn't usually get 2/1s for 1 without a significant downside. And this one isn't just a 2/1 for 1. It has a major upside in vampires. We talked about this in the black video. One of the most supported archetypes, Madness, has been very well supported in Shadows over Innistrad. So I think this card is going to be a major player in Standard. I would not be surprised if it's a 4 of in a tier 1 deck. And it might not even be vampires and stuff. We've talked about this with several cards. Just a 2/1 for 1 is going to see play in mono red aggro, replacing something like Monastery Swiftspear, which rotates.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the ability is just all upside, but yeah, it curves out usually the 1 drops in an aggressive list in red. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. It's really great. Poor Jackal Pups. I mean, it does not look very good for our old friend Jackal Pups anymore.
Not at all. A relic from the game's past. Well, far less exciting. Back to the land of intro pack rares, which means big flyers with 4 power and toughness, apparently, in Shadows over Innistrad.
Seems to be a theme, yeah.
Yeah, so this one's a red angel. It has an ability that I don't think is relevant, something about dealing 1 damage to a source's controller. Yeah, this is just bad, right, Chaz?
Yeah, it's really not that great. I don't know what much else I can say about it. Even the ability is not that amazing, and for 6 mana, I mean, it's an intro pack rare, so your expectations aren't really that high. But even for an intro pack rare, this isn't that amazing. I mean, we talked about a few other colors now. They're intro pack rares. I mean, this just is not that good.
Yeah, this might rank near the bottom of the intro pack rare cycle, actually.
I think this is probably the worst.
I will say, though, the one upside, it is a red angel, which is kind of unique.
True.
There's not that many red angels, so maybe, like, flavor-wise, there's something there that players, angel collectors will like. I'm digging really deep on this one to find the upside, because I don't think it sees playing constructed in any sense of the word.
No, absolutely not. And yeah, I guess digging deep, it is an angel, so that's always pretty good for Magic players. Maybe that pushes it up ever so slightly past Nephalia Moondrakes, just because it's an angel. But yeah, that's we're really grasping here.
Well, let's move on to the flip card from Red, the flip rare. This one was one of the last cards spoiled in the set, and it is odd. I'm not sure what I think of this one. So 3/2 with haste on the front side. On the back side, it's a 4/3, but when werewolves enter the battlefield, you can transform them. Is there any value in immediately transforming your werewolves, Chaz?
Maybe. We talked about a lot of these tribal archetypes getting a lot more support. So if you look back through some of the other werewolves, I mean, that could really start changing things when they come in already, flipped into their werewolf version. Like even Cruin Outlaw being transformed into Terror of Cruin Pass. This is going back into the first Innistrad. Maybe there's something there when it comes in as the flip side. I really like this card. At the very least, it's a 3-mana 3/2 with haste, which isn't amazing, but it's not terrible. And you get a 4/3 when it does flip. So it's pretty good. And yeah, you're right. It was one of the last rares we got previewed and spoiled to us, but really interesting.
Yeah, maybe the most interesting part is the werewolves don't actually enter the battlefield transformed. They enter the battlefield and then transform. So if you play a Huntmaster of the Fells, it enters the battlefield, you get your 2/2 Huntmaster and your wolf token, then it immediately flips, becomes a 4/4, shoots your opponent and something your opponent controls. So you're taking advantage of that actual transformation trigger on some cards too, which could be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think it's a really good enabler, and we talked about some cards giving some tribal archetypes some more support, and I think this is definitely where the Bandit comes into play.
The downside is, as we saw with the original Innistrad block, flip werewolves were not very playable. I mean, it was pretty much Huntmaster or bust when it came to really playable flip werewolves.
Yeah, that is the downside here. The good thing is like I said, it's not. It is a pretty good creature on its basis. It's a 3/2 with haste. It's not like Cruin Outlaw where you're kind of getting a 2/2 like a mediocre creature. It has haste, so it could be a 3-mana card that you include in an aggressive red list, and then you get the benefit of it just flipping on the off chance.
Well,
Even if you don't have any other werewolves.
let's move on because there's another 3-mana red card coming up that I'm even more excited to hear your thoughts about. But we gotta wait a minute. There's a couple cards in between. First, we need to quickly talk about the Shadows over Innistrad version of the janky red enchantment, Harness the Storm. Essentially, when you cast an instant or sorcery, you give an instant or sorcery of the same name in your graveyard flashback, is essentially how it plays out, except the card doesn't get exiled when it's done. Have you thought of anything this card could be used for, Chaz?
Not off the top of my head, but I would guess this is a really interesting Commander EDH card. Again, like some of the cards in this set, we're going to have Tomer's expertise here, but maybe in like a Niv. What was the commander, the blue-red Niv Magus? Maybe it's Maybe it's cool in one of those decks. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one that I could imagine showing up on Against the Odds. I haven't really thought about what to do with it. I know the big problem is, for me, you still have to pay the mana cost of the spell in your graveyard. If you could get that spell for free, I would be much more excited about it. So it's not a way you can really. I don't think there's a good way of breaking it. It's more of a value card almost, like a Pyromancer's Ascension, where you're doubling up on spells to get more value out of it, but it's such a big mana sink, I don't think you can really break it like you can some other red enchantments.
Right. I think that's where I end up with this card. It's kind of hard to be getting that value when you have to pay for the spell that you're casting, and then the spell gets flashback. But maybe if it's cards like Lightning Bolt or Jataxian Probe, then it starts to get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a place for it. It seems like a lot of work to make it actually functional and constructed, but we'll see. I'm sure that, like I said, I think this is a card I'll end up brewing around eventually, just to see if it's possible it can work anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason not to try, right?
Yeah, I mean, no downside in trying. So, next up, the red 2-drop from the set. I actually got to spoil this one, which was pretty sweet. Scourge Wolf. So another horror. We have horrors in just about every color. First striker can get double strike if you have Delirium. Where does this fit in the red 2-drop slot in Standard, Chaz? I know you like aggressive decks.
Yes, I do. This was a really cool card to spoil, so congrats on that. This is kind of your little pet,
yes,
apparently.
Yeah,
it's a wolf. All right, so terrible jokes aside, it's not Ash Zealot, unfortunately, but it does a good job at being a good 2-mana, a 2-costed creature in an aggressive deck. Again, this all hinges on how easy Delirium is going to be able to achieve. In red, I don't know how likely that's going to be, but maybe creatures are dying, you get to play some spells, so maybe you get to Delirium faster than you realize. But again, this really all depends on how fast you can trigger Delirium, because the later on it gets, the less important it becomes.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that red is one of the harder cards to trigger Delirium early, which is my main worry about this card. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to have Delirium on turn 3 or even turn 4 unless you're really building around it, and then you're probably playing some subpar cards just to make Scourge Wolf better. So, I don't know. If a 2/2 first strike for 2 is somehow good enough, I think it will be obviously playable. And if there's some way I'm missing that you can turn on the double strike without warping your deck too much, it'll probably be decent. But, so I don't know. I'm not an aggro player, so this is far from my expertise on red 2-drop. So I'll go with Chaz on this one. Luckily, red saved the best, maybe, for last. This is the card I most want to hear Chaz's thoughts on. I've talked about it a little bit. Chaz has stayed mum on his thoughts about Prodder. So, Chaz, Prodder, take us away.
Yeah, so I was really quiet about this card. I wanted to see where people gauged and where people evaluate this card. I am going to say on this video that I love Prodder. I love Prodder. I think it's not Boggart Brute. I know yourself and other people like to compare this to our old friend Boggart Brute. And yeah, okay, for 3 you're getting Boggart Brute, but the ability is really where this creature becomes a lot better, and obviously why it's rare. Keep in mind that this does not sculpt your hand. You do get to draw your way out of situations, and your opponent doesn't get to lock you down. And really, this is the epitome of what red creature cards are about. It's the menace, and it has our favorite keyword on there. But menace. But really, menace is interesting here. It does give it some pseudo evasion, and when you look at what red is trying to do, you're trying to get your opponent from 20 to dead as fast as you can. And Prodder helps with that. Keep in mind, if your opponent is giving you lands, that's fine. You were going to draw them anyway, and then you get that kind of extra draw step to get to another good card in the meantime. So I compare this more to like a Abbot of Carroll Keep or something like that, and that was a good red card. So I think Prodder is definitely viable. It's a good card, and it's really what red needs. And if you look at other creatures around it, you get to look at cards like Incorrigible Use, where you have a madness, and we looked at those. That's one of the madness cards that is less madness cost than its actual cost. And when you start putting cards like that into the graveyard and taking some damage, you might start adding it up real quick.
Oh, well, it pains me to say this, but I have talked to enough people now, including Chaz, who I had no idea his opinions on this card until right now, that have said this card is good, that I think I'm going to have to just admit that I was probably wrong about this one with my initial reaction. So a 3/2 for 3 doesn't really excite me still, but the ability is a lot better than I gave it credit for at first glance, and I think this one will end up seeing play with Standard for the reasons that Chaz described.
Yeah, it's a strong rare. We all didn't like Vexing Devil, and probably still don't, but we were all kind of wrong on that one too. Vexing Devil ended up being a good card in Modern, and for a little time in Standard, but I think Prodder's right up there with really viable red cards. It just does everything red players want, and you're getting card advantage at the very least, and at the most you're dealing damage, which basically what you're supposed to be doing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, red likes to deal damage and have aggressively costed evasive creatures, so I guess that it does fit into what red likes to do.
Yeah, I can understand the skepticism to players. I mean, whenever people see your opponent gets to choose what happens, yeah, I understand it doesn't seem great. But when both modes are not good for your opponent, that's when cards like this become a lot better.
All right, well, you heard it here first. Prodder is a real deal, and I am probably wrong about it, or my initial reaction to it is probably wrong.
It's okay. It's okay. We know you don't like red. You don't like talking about red cards, so it's forgivable.
Well,
it's forgivable.
The good news is I have survived our review of red cards. We have reached the end. So, Chaz, you aggro player, you give us some final thoughts on red in Shadows over Innistrad.
Red is strong. The mythics aren't really anything to write home about. They're really disappointing in terms of the overall mythics and just in the color in general. But there's a lot of strong rares, and I think that's really where red is going to shine. It has some interesting other cards that obviously we don't get to talk about. We're just focusing on the rares and mythics, but just to name a few briefly, you just get Incorrigible Use, the Bloodseeker, even the Village Messenger, the 1-mana 1/1 flip haste creature. Yeah, red's strong. Red's really strong in Shadows over Innistrad.
I think so too. Obviously, I think red has the worst mythics by far, actually, out of any color. But their rares are up there. Their rares are really powerful. Maybe not quite as good as black, but in the conversation for one of the stronger colors at rare. So, Chaz, favorite red card on the way out the door?
Ooh, I think it has to be Sin Prodder. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep my Sin Prodder train going hard. And yeah, these rares or these mythics, they make the green mythic seem good. So I guess that makes me feel better.
I think I'm going to go with Falkenrath Gorger. I really like that card, just the upside of it for what it does. I know I'm going to lose to it a ton of times because it's the red 1-drop with no downside. So I think that card's going to be very strong, and I'm excited, even as someone that doesn't like aggro, to see what Madness can do. Because for some reason, the idea of a Madness aggro deck kind of hooks me in more than just a typical black-red aggro deck. So I'm excited to see what happens with that deck in Standard.
Yeah, absolutely. It really opens up a lot of things, especially with the Vampire Madness archetype that's obviously going to be strong. And yeah, it's a good card to pick. I agree with your pick there. It's a good card.
Well, anyway, that has been our red review. We have one more color to go, and then we have the colorless and artifact cards, the lands and colorless cards. So make sure to come back tomorrow. We'll be talking about Chaz's favorite color, I think, the green cards, as we continue through our Shadows over Innistrad set review. Thank you for watching. We will talk to you tomorrow.